Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Belize Tourism Futures podcast. Today, I'm talking to Efren Perez, who is, as of this year, the new president of the Belize Tourism Industry Association. The BTIA is the largest private sector tourism organization in the country, representing the interests of hotels, resorts, tour operators, restaurants, tour guides, and travel related businesses across Belize. Welcome, Efren. So, first off, congratulations on your presidency at the BTIA. Could you please share a bit about how you got started in tourism?
Sure, absolutely. I'm not new in tourism for sure. I think, you know, you and I had a conversation earlier in terms of, how long I knew you. I think we counted more than 15 years since you started within the lodge at Shaw Creek. And before that, I was already in tourism. Interestingly enough, I started working in tourism at the BTIA. I started as a marketing officer at the time. That was probably in 2006, I think, 2007. And since then, I got engaged within tourism because I realized that was my passion. Many times I think we choose career paths, but when we actually get into the field, we tend to diversify into something totally different that you find that if you hadn't experienced it, you wouldn't have known you liked it. And so to me, that is what had happened. And from there, I started to work within the industry itself. I worked at the Best Western Hotel in Belize City as sales manager. Also worked at Ian Anderson's Caves branch doing marketing for them. So I've been within the industry, and within that time, I've always been part of the BTIA in some form or the other, as a member, and then as a chairperson for the Cayo chapter. And then I took over the reins of the chairmanship in Corozal, which is the north part of Belize. And earlier this year in January, I became the national president.
Jumping into questions about the BTIA, ballpark figure, how many members does the association currently represent?
Um, Currently we are around, I believe the last count we did was around 256 members. Okay. But on our peak periods, we've surpassed 500 at some point. And I think right now the low figures is attributed mainly because of the effects of COVID and everybody coming out of that. Um, but we've seen a gradual increase. So that's positive for us.
And what is the value for being a part of the BTIA?
Well, BTIA has different elements that members can take advantage of. One of our key areas that we've always made a push on is the advocacy part of it. And when it comes to advocacy, there's a wide range of things that we can advocate for our members, from looking at issues that are occurring at the border where we can have some sort of ease in the restrictions and processes. Those are conversations that we have and we will continue to have. When it comes to higher impacts to hotels, tour operators, be it within taxes, be it within, changes in regulations that the government is doing. We have a seat at the Belize Tourism Board as part of the Belize Tourism Board's board of directors also. And so that allows us to really voice the concerns of our members. Um, and more so, really looking at all the destinations by themselves. And that's one of the reasons why since I took on the office, I've been trying to prioritize visiting the destinations to really get myself familiar with all the key issues that are occurring and to see how best we would be able to develop some sort of strategic plan that will help us to advocate for those issues. Obviously, the other part is also looking at products that will enhance tourism on a whole. We have, for example, our Destination Belize magazine, which we haven't published since COVID, but now we're working on a new edition for hopefully 2026 or 2027. And that takes a lot of planning, but it's one of the key marketing tools, is our signature marketing tool for Belize. You find it in almost all hotel rooms. It's distributed at trade shows, and that gives members, and not only members, but also the destination itself, the value added and exposure to it. Apart from that, we used to do BTEX, which is the Belize Tourism Expo, where we bring travel agents from outside to meet the product and really familiarize themselves with what Belize has to offer. This year, we're not doing a BTEX, but we're doing another mini version of it, which is the Mundo Maya exchange. So it will only involve the 5 countries that make up the Mundo Maya. We're going to have that in Placencia in June. And that gives us an opportunity to create more of the B2B networking that is needed for our hotels within the region. And so it sort of strengthens the Mundo Maya brand, but also allows private sector to have a better reach and connections within those key partners that have already established their markets in the region. But apart from that, we also do a lot of trainings. We just got certified to offer to our members a customer service training, which is called the Service Best. It's a regional certification. And so once the hotels are trained within that program, their frontline staff or their staff on a whole will be able to get pins that will identify them as a certified customer service individual that is recognized regionally. So that's really a great branding for hotels. And then we look at all the different other areas, disaster risk management, trying to help our properties mitigate or be prepared for impacts of, natural disasters, hurricanes, which is something that we face on a yearly basis. And so those are key elements that we look at. And obviously, apart from that, talking to members, traveling around, really listening to them, we are able to look at other gaps that may exist that we probably could also work around to provide those trainings to our members.
So you mentioned that there are some interconnected issues that face the entire industry, but there are some that are very unique to the region.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing what is like examples of the interconnected issues and what are regional specific issues?
Okay, so for example, regionally or more centralized issues that we've encountered, and just a general example is in San Pedro. We did our visits there a couple weeks ago. Some of the issues that they're facing are like infrastructure and roads, the road conditions leading up north, the ability to have electrical lights within the entire region to provide some sort of security for travelers coming in and out, the congestion of traffic, So those are things that as a private sector organization, we can't change directly, but we can definitely sit with the players who are in charge of those areas for us to be able to have a more meaningful conversation that would lead to specific changes in those areas. And with the help of our members voicing it out, it gives us that advantage. I've always mentioned to all our members in all locations, our strength as BTI comes within the numbers. The more members we have in a certain region, then it gives us that ability to sit down with the key players and really dialogue in ways in which we could find solutions. When it comes to things that are interconnected, um, one of them is the networking that we're doing regionally. And why I say it's interconnected, because those tour operators have already established their business functions within bigger markets of Europe, South America, and even North America. For a small hotel owner operator in Belize, getting to some of those markets would mean added investments on their own. So if we can make that connection for them and put them in contact with these people who already have that market set up, then it makes it easier to get more overnight stays in the country. But while doing that, and while that gets strengthened, one of the things that we also have to be looking at is the issues at the border. For example, in the western side, the Melchor border, for example, closes in comparison to the northern border that is open 24 hours. Those are issues that impact. Why? Because if these operators are going to be sending people to Belize, then we need to have flexibility at the border for them to pass at certain times. Or if our guest wants to go and do Tikal early morning, they have to wait until a certain hour for them to be able to exit. But those are discussions I believe that we've already started to have. um, we work very closely right now with the Ministry of Tourism and within their regional integration unit that is focused primarily on that. So there is a combination of things that I think, like I said, that when you work on one, it actually rolls over to another one and another one and another one. It's not something that we can fix completely, because then it's something that has to go as we progress. to see what changes occurs and how those could be amended.
In an interview that you did with Despierta Belize, you mentioned that training and capacity building is a constant need in your community and across Belize. Do you believe that this is a challenge that BTIA should be responsible for, or should it fall within the realm of government or the private sector?
I think when it comes to training and development for or human capital, I think that it's a combination of things. Um, we have been working very closely since the start of the year with the Belize Tourism Board on several capacity and trainings that they are going to be rolling out. So we're going to be a very integral part of that. But apart from that, we are also looking at the training opportunities that we can offer to our members as a benefit because of the reason of us traveling to these destinations and really hearing people out and seeing those gaps that are not provided by the Belize Tourism Board or any other government entity. And so we tend to provide those trainings so that there is a combination of options that members would be able to take advantage of.
So we've established that you're from northern Belize, and as many people know, like the region has often lagged when it comes to tourism development. What do you think is the main reason for this, and how can we change this?
Corozal is one of those areas that, for many within the tourism industry, they consider as the forgotten town, similar to what they would consider Punta Gorda. And that's because we don't have that mass tourism in the area. Nonetheless, I think that both locations, both Corozal and Punta Gorda, for that case, they have unique products that could be showcased. I think the problem is that we haven't really explored those. There have been studies that have been done. Corozal has been divided into two areas from a study that was conducted a couple years ago. We've identified our cultural corridor, we identified our ecological corridor, and that already helps us to start to develop products within those areas that will help us to attract more tourism into the area, be it local tourism or be it international tourism. But the potentials are there. I think it's just a matter of really trying to look at it, exploit them in a sustainable manner for us to be able to have that as a product that we'll be able to offer and that hotels will then be able to take advantage of.
If I go back like 15 years ago, for sure I remember that Toledo was the least visited place in Belize. I don't think that's the case anymore. I
No.
know the tourism is growing rapidly there, and now I see maybe Curacao is the least visited place by tourists, and
Yeah.
I find that like as I go to places like Ambergiski and I see it's so congested, and that we could diversify the tourism arrivals, and I know that the government, Ministry of Tourism is working on diversifying this. But I wonder if one thing hasn't been considered, which is that typically for people to go to certain places, there needs to be like something called an anchor firm. And in the case for Belize, it would be anchor resort, like one or two major resorts within specific regions or areas that draw people because it's so extraordinary. Does Corozal have this, or are they working towards like that? And like, how could you even achieve this?
Well, for Corozal, I don't think we have like a significant anchor resort, like you mentioned. There are various smaller hotels, but there isn't one that you'd say it's comparable to those that are inland or even in the Keys that have so many activities that you can do in one. And I think it goes back to not having the traffic that we need, and so investments are made in those particular areas. And people might be a little bit reluctant in making investments simply because they're not sure if it's actually going to bring more people in. And I think that that is one of the reasons why for BTIA Corozal specifically, it's important for us to really generate that membership from the local community, specifically hotels and restaurants, for us to be able to sit down and have that conversation in terms of how can we develop a product that we would be able to showcase to the international market as a brand. I mean, if you look at places, for example, in southern Mexico, they have their magical cities, which are small communities that they've built and they've identified extensive activities that could be done. I mean, it's something that obviously we can replicate in these areas. Um, Corozal and Orange Walk, for example, have a wide, diverse cultural experience, especially when it comes to the cuisine also. And so really trying to get that out and going will link back to everything else I mentioned, looking at trainings to make sure that people come up to a certain standard, because you just can't throw the product there and not have it to a certain standard. I mean, travelers coming in are looking for specific things, and so we need to make sure that is there. But more so, I think that for Corozal and Orange Walk, if we look at the current trends of travelers who are seeking experiences, that they're no longer really looking at going to the beach and doing the typical spring break. They want to be more relaxed. They want to, be in connection with nature. I think that is what these locations are offering. And so I think if we look at it from that perspective, there's a window of opportunities that can certainly be executed there.
Yeah, and I believe somewhere, some a place like Curacao can tap into the Mexican market because Mexicans are right next door there, and you could potentially try to drop more people from Chetumal for day trips. Even I wonder if that's even a possibility. Have you explored this? What would that look like?
Well, we have actually. We have been working very closely with the Ministry of Tourism and their regional integration unit. And so in the case of Corozal and North and Southern Mexico, which is Chetumal and those areas, we've managed to remove the restrictions of Mexicans coming in. And so they are able to come in into the country using the Belize border cards that are issued. That border card at first was only given to residents of Quintana Roo, but that has been expanded to all 5 southern states of Mexico. And so it includes Quintana Roo, Yucatan, Campeche, Tabasco, and Chiapas. And these travelers can come into to Belize using that card. Now, the issue with it, and that we're really glad to hear, is that the Prime Minister has mentioned that he is looking at ways in which he wants to offer that card for free for Mexicans, similar to what they do for Belizeans. And I think that will give us a greater impact when it comes to exactly what you're saying, people being able to come across the border to have a day trip, or to overnight or for a weekend, similar to what Belizeans in the north do going across the border. I mean, we go on our own. We don't need to get advertising for us to go. We go because we like the gastronomy and all of that. In meetings that we've held with the Canaco Servitor, which is the private sector for Quintana Roo, they've expressed interest in working with us in terms of trying to see how that could be achieved. Sitting with key players that can actually make changes towards a more feasible border entry. I think that really will help not only the destination, Corozal, but also the entire tourism sector.
So, since we're on the topic of like border crossing, what other regulations do you think can be mitigated or removed so that we can bring more travelers to Belize?
Well, one of the key things is that Belize already is an expensive destination. I mean, compared to anywhere that you go within Central America, you tend to find that Belize is one of those that is expensive. And apart from that, in connecting flights, international flights coming to Belize are even higher than flying into even Chetumal next door or Guatemala. You tend to find that those rates are much less. I think that is where I think we need to start to look at and see where we can become competitive within the region. Um, all these different countries that form part of Central America and the Caribbean, every day they're competing in terms of trying to figure out how they're going to get more tourists into their areas for them to be able to continue to sustain their tourism development. Conversation needs to lie within that, like you said. How is it that we can work towards really making the destination a little bit more affordable than making it more expensive? That is one of the primary things that we have to look at now more than ever. Destinations are really being a little bit more competitive, trying to get customers and travelers coming out of the US to visit their destinations instead of going to somewhere else. And so that proactive mode needs to definitely be made. But that is a conversation that we have to have with government directly to see where and what it is that through private sector we could help to alleviate some of these issues. I think that also will lead to several other questions that we'll be able to have with either the DTB or Ministry of Tourism, who are the government bodies that are more inclined to working with us. And from there, we can start to make conversations that will be more impactful.
And what is the dynamic between BTIA and the Belize Tourism Board these days? Is there like, do you feel like there's genuine collaboration? Do public stakeholders take the industry seriously?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that I've seen personally is that we've been able to have a really good relationship with the Belize Tourism Board, and we intend to continue doing that. They partner with us on certain key events. There is one key event that we form part of within Central America, which is the Central America Travel Market, which is done every year and it rotates within different countries. This year in October, it will be in Honduras. But BTB has always been an active part on that. And so the greater number of private sector companies that participate with us at that show, BTB takes care of all the pavilion and make sure that we look good. But more importantly than that, I think that just working with them in terms of looking at influencers and all the different work that they do on the background, I think that plays an important role, and that we can actually continue working with them because we sit on their board of directors also. So we do have a voice at that table. Um, so I think that is quite important. But outside of what is the Belize Tourism Board, we also work very closely with the Ministry of Tourism. And so that gives us a greater advantage to looking at all the other issues outside of just the marketing aspect that we'd be able to take more advantage of and make more impacts for members.
And what about your relationship with the Belize Hotel Association? I know for a fact that I've been in rooms where uh, people would even consider you competitors. What would you say to that?
Well, I don't find that the Belize Hotel Association is our competitor, to be honest with you. In fact, they hold a seat on our board of directors at BTIA. So they have a voice within the organization in terms of the things that we do. Obviously, I think that in many instances, we have not been able to really partner together in certain projects. But I think that there is a greater window of collaboration that could potentially be done. And we're willing to work with them. It's an organization that looks after big hotels in Belize, and so there is much more input that we can get from them with hotels that are probably not part of our membership. But on a greater scope, collaboration is key and networking is key. Any opportunity that we have at this point is going to be a positive path for us.
So let's move on to some challenges that I've just based on hearing from individuals and friends when I visit Belize. These are things that they always mention. And I wonder what your take is on this. So I flew into Belize in December and I saw long lines way outside of the building and so much congestion at the international airport. The tourists were complaining and yelling at each other. And at one point, there's two lines. There's a line for locals and there's a line for tourists. And and a local was in front of me, and she started walking on the line for the locals. There wasn't a sign that said this is for locals, but if you're a local, you know that you could walk there. And a few of the tourists actually yelled at the Belizean and said, "Hey, the line is back here." First of all, I was surprised because I'm like, these people are on vacation. I'm surprised that they're shouting at each other. But then I thought about like, okay, so it's just because they're frustrated. First of all, it's a Thursday. It's not even a Saturday when most of the flights come in. And their first impression is a place that basically can't handle the load. What do you think about this issue? Is this something that's being taken seriously by the BTIA or by the BTB or by the government as a whole? Like, what is being done about this?
Well, I know that there is an expansion project that is happening right now at the international airport, and that is primarily the focus of that is primarily because of the increase of international flights that we've gotten. There is also a need for additional manpower. I mean, I think we have much more immigration officers working right now at the international airport simply because of the increase of flights that we've had. But that is certainly an issue that I think affects the first impression coming into the country, and not really taking away the issues from us. But even when you travel to any other international airport, you tend to find long queues, heading into the immigration kiosks. And it's just because there are certain protocols that have to be taken by these immigration officers. I mean, you just can't come, stamp, and go. They have to be keen on certain things. And I think that is where the long wait lines occur. But certainly, I think that there is window for us to be able to look at how that could be expedited. I know, for example, that they've launched the arrivals card so that you'll be able to fill in your information from before. And so all of those are things that we have to look at and see how it is that we can make it more effective, to see how those lines would be able to get queued down. But it is a conversation that we've been having, especially with the Belize Tourism Board and with the ministry also, because those are border entry points that we need to have as flexible as possible, yet not removing the protocols that need to be in place for immigration officers.
I also visited Key Calker in December, and it looks like the island is starting to feel a strain of a high visitor traffic. So is there a role for BTIA to help local stakeholders with handle the congestion, improve the roads, and even coordinate better visitor flow uh, overall?
Yes, definitely. I think that is one of the conversations that I mentioned to you earlier that we're going to be having in the next couple of weeks, with representatives of the Ministry of Tourism, representative of the Transport Department, especially in San Pedro, to look at those congestions that are occurring and the infrastructure road developments that are happening there. For us to be able to be a part of that conversation, because like I mentioned earlier, everything really ties down to the experiences of our tourists coming in. And so when a tourist comes in and they land in San Pedro and they're heading up north, and they're seeing all these potholes on their golf carts, or the threat of even overturning, on the road and all of that. Those are security concerns that we need to take very seriously for our guests, because that will have an impact on the overall industry at the end of the day. And so that conversation needs to happen, and it needs to be something that is recurrent for us, not only in San Pedro and Kikoker, but in many other destinations that are developing, or that have similar issues. Our advocacy has to be focused on the overall guest experience and on the benefits that our members will be able to gain.
When you travel to different places and you're a tourist yourself, you see how you're treated as a tourist, and then you're like, okay, things that you like,
Yeah.
things that you dislike, and there's like so many. You can learn from so many different things and come up with interesting ideas that you can implement back home. In your case, what is one or two tourism related practices that you've seen in other places that you visited that you would like to implement in Belize, and why?
I think it would have to be more of the sustainable tourism practices that I've seen in certain destinations. For instance, in Antigua, Guatemala, they have strict building codes, the way they paint buildings, and things of that sort, whereby it allows the industry, or the industry in that particular community, to develop much more organically and much more sustainable than anything else. And I think that those are some of the areas that I would definitely want to see us doing a little bit more in other destinations, like for example Corozal, Toledo, so that we don't get to the point that we are when it comes to the traffic congestions in San Pedro. It is mitigated ahead of time. We have a plan in place, rather than trying to battle it out at the end. I think that should be part of our general focus in order to make sure that things work a certain way. Now, one thing is for us to wish that it happens that way, another thing is actually for it to happen. We all know that that doesn't work, but I mean, it's always good to have an aim and end goal for us to be able to look at. But yes, I think overarchingly, I think that sustainable tourism practice is one of the key things that we need to look at. And within that, we have all that contributes to pollution within different areas, the traffic congestions and all of that. But I think moving it towards that direction is definitely going to allow us to grow as an industry and be more competitive also. Travelers are always looking for certain key things within destinations, and that gives us a greater positioning in the market.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. While preparing for this interview, I did a bit of research, and one thing that I came across several times whenever I would hear what do tourism organizations do and how can they be very effective, what came up was that often there's a lot of leadership change in government, right? And often those are the decision makers, the ones that implement the policies. So one thing that you have to make sure as an association is you do research, you do reports that are able to last several leadership changes. So it would be like, okay, if you're interested in sustainability, how can you create a guide that is able to like showcase like this is how we want to grow in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years. And essentially, it's not something that would get dropped between government changes. As you go about your term as president of the BTIA, is there something similar to like having a North Star where you want to like try to potentially move the industry towards that you have in mind?
There is a tourism master plan that has been developed, and that is primarily been developed by Ministry of Tourism and the BTB. But it does have a lot of valuable information that we as private sector need to continue to push beyond the life of any administration. Why? Because I think those are areas within the master plan that have been identified as critical, and it needs to have its continuity during the life of that master plan. When that plan comes to an end, then it's revisited to see what it is that was accomplished, what wasn't, and see if it's still relevant or not, so that it could be continued in that process. So for me, I think that just in the last couple of weeks, I got a copy of the master plan for Belize, and also I think there's one in San Pedro. And so I'm still reviewing those documents just to make sure that I'm in line with what it is that they're doing. And for us to actually have our local chapters, will be able to use that as a guide to see where it is that we're falling and where is it that we need to make improvements on. And all of these things, when it comes to infrastructure, traffic, and all of that, are part of that general plan. And it's important to actually keep that and not try to reinvent a wheel, but work from what has been studied and created so far.
Okay, final two questions. Over the next few years, how will you gauge BTIA's success? Like, are there any particular metrics like revenue, visitor satisfaction, membership growth that you are thinking of and watching closely?
Yes, certainly membership growth is one of the key areas or the key factors that we're looking at, to make sure that we're seeing the growth that we need. Once we start to see the membership growth, then we'll be able to actually gauge it from there in terms of the membership satisfaction, on the other end. Um, but more so, I think that with the partnerships and the networking that we're doing, we should be able to actually see and contribute towards the arrival numbers coming into the country. And so all of those will play an important role in terms of how it is that we are creating products, creating activities, creating festivals that are attracting more. Um, and through the use of new technology that we're looking at implementing, I think all of those will play a key role in terms of how it is that all those numbers will start to increase. One of the aims at the end of this year is to see a growth in the membership of our local chapters and BTI on the whole.
Finally, what legacy do you hope to leave by the end of your term? And how can everyday Belizeans, whether you're in tourism or not, contribute to a more vibrant, sustainable future for our country?
I think that my focus primarily for BTIA, I mean, I have a passion for the industry. It's certainly for us to have an organization that is much more modernized than what it is right now, where members are able to access information easily, where members are able to get information easily, where the organization is looking at key areas that are impacting members and creating products, activities that will at the end of the day have them engaged as much as possible. I think the issue that we've had over the years, when we've lost a couple members in the process, is simply that it's not that we have not been doing. The problem is that we have not been communicating. And I think that that is one of our key products that we're looking at right now to see how best would be able to improve on that. I can tell you that we're working on developing a monthly podcast right now. And on that podcast, we'll be able to share a lot more information in terms of what we're doing on a regular basis. Because I find that, when we do newsletters and you send it out through emails, it either gets lost or people just don't read them. But you tend to find more people listening and looking at social media a lot more. And I think that those are the channels that we need to look at. I mean, really moving with the trends of what's happening now in order for us to be able to share the valuable information that we have and really get more members engaged. And doing so, I think and I hope that we'll be able to attract the younger generation to really step up into leadership positions that would enhance the further development of the industry itself. Right now we're looking at projects that whereby we want to incorporate students to be more active within the industry in all the different chapters. And so that will help us in terms of really trying to help them to mold them, apart from having the education part of it, really contributing through organizations like the BTIA to see a little bit much more of difference for them to be able to have that experience and to learn an appreciation for the industry itself. At the end of the day, those are going to be the leaders that will come up. So we need to start to prepare them at some point. And I think that that's the direction that we definitely want to take.
My guest today has been Efren Perez. Efren, thanks for being on the Belize Tourism Futures podcast.
Thank you too, Lawrence. It was a very good experience.